Well, you know, in the United States, there's currently a resolution in the U.S. Congress that says that should Iran reach the threshold of having the technical capacity to produce a nuclear weapon, then the United States should carry out or should begin to carry out military operations, or that should be the trip wire for the U.S. To see that development as a direct threat to the U.S. national security. And of course, what that means is military intervention. Now, Iran has already reached that threshold. They already have the technical capacity to produce a nuclear weapon. Okay, so this legislation is just the means of declaring war on Iran without a declaration of war. You see, and this bill is sponsored by a racist Zionist senator by the name of Lieberman. He's an arch supporter of the State of Israel, and AIPAC, the American-Israeli Cooperation Committee, has been pressuring the U.S. Congress to establish restrictions on the Obama administration's ability to negotiate with Iran. We know that the Israelis have been carrying out covert war in Iran, killing Iranian scientists, sabotaging Iranian nuclear capabilities, carrying out different types of clandestine violence inside of Iran, which of course if you did it inside the United States would have declared war on you. If you were assassinating American scientists on American soil, you understand, you would have a problem from the United States, a serious problem. And it won't be just them talking to you neither. You see? But the fact that the Israelis and the Americans are doing this every day inside of Iran, and Iran is then told, and Iran is being held as the aggressor. I mean, let's look at something here. The last time, the fact that everybody in Iran's neighborhood has a nuclear weapon but Iran, everybody has one. The Pakistanis have it. The Russians have it. The Indians have a nuclear weapon. The Israelis have a nuclear weapon. Everybody in their neighborhood has a nuclear weapon, and Iran has said they don't want a nuclear weapon because it's anti-Islamic, and they don't even have one, but they're being penalized for thinking about it. Just thinking about it. Oh, maybe we might have a nuclear weapon. Sanctions? You can't have that thought. Where you get that thought from? That thought, if you keep that thought, we're going to attack you. Hey, but hey, everybody here got weapons. What are you talking about? The Israelis got weapons. They're the only nuclear power in the region. Nobody talks about them. That's like having a conversation with a 1,000-pound elephant in the room, and everybody's making like the elephant ain't there. The elephant is right there. And everybody said, well, so what are we going to do about elephants? Well, maybe we should go to Africa. But isn't there an elephant right there? There ain't no elephant there. You see? This is a conspiracy of the West, because this tells you that the purpose of the Israeli state is to create and maintain military hegemonic Western control of a vital region of the planet that supplies oil, and that is the major crossroads for a lot of the commerce and wealth of Europe and the United States and the Mediterranean. Now you have to remember, this has a historical basis, because historically the West never had access to these resources under when Islam was an empire. The whole Mediterranean was controlled by Muslims. In fact, Europe in the Dark Ages couldn't venture outside of the European peninsula. Okay? It was only with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and with the collapse of the early Islamic sultanates and the fall of Moorish Spain in the 15th century were Europeans actually able to begin commercial trade with the Far East. Up until that time, the trade routes were completely blocked by Islam. In fact, the discovery of America by the Europeans was a consequence of this reality. Christopher Columbus was sailing west in order to get east. to trade with the Far East, because he couldn't trade through Persia, which was Islamic. He couldn't trade through Iraq or ancient Babylon, which was Muslim. Okay? All these countries were Muslim. Whole of northern India, Muslim. You see? So this was a historical thing. And once the U.S. and once this paradigm changed in the 19th century, once it changed, the Europeans were dead set that they would never let it happen again. And that's why Israel exists. That's why the Europeans support Israel. That's why it's a European settler state. It's a military settler state in the heart of the Ummah, in order to maintain military and hegemonic control of that region. And that's why the U.S. supports it unilaterally. That's why they're never going to stop supporting it. And that's why the state of Israel has to be destroyed. It has to be destroyed root and branch. And the reason why it has to be destroyed root and branch is because, first of all, it's not a democratic state. Because if it was a democratic state, the Palestinians who live inside the territorial Israel would be able to exercise their vote as citizens. And if they could exercise their vote as citizens, you wouldn't have the current regime that you have, because they outnumber Israelis. This is why the settlements are continuing. This is why Jerusalem the Arabs are being pushed out of Jerusalem so that they can declare it as their capital. You see? All of this is designed for one thing and one thing only: Western control of a vital region to their a vital strategic region. And it has absolutely nothing to do with democracy. It has everything to do with white supremacy. Again, we're back on white supremacy, because the European settler state of Israel is a racist state. It's a racist state, because even black Jews are discriminated against in Israel. And the original Jews were black. The original Jews didn't come from Central Asia. The original Jews didn't come from Germany. They didn't speak Hebrew in Germany. They spoke Yiddish. What is Yiddish? Yiddish is a bastard language of a conglomeration of a lot of dialects: Germanic, Eastern European, Slavic. It's Yiddish. It's not Hebrew. Hebrew is the original language of the Jewish people. Okay? And that's the language in the Torah. And we all know as Muslims that the Torah and the Injil are legitimate books vouchsafed from Allah. The first 5 books of Moses, the Torah. Okay? So, these individuals who are in the land of Palestine have no lineage to this land by blood, no lineage to this land by religion, and no lineage to this land by race. They are interlopers. They are Europeans. It's a European settler state. And the Israelis know this. This is why the foremost claim of the Israelis is to recognize the legitimacy of Israel as a state, and that it should be a two-state solution. That Palestine and Israel should live side by side as two states. Any Palestinian that accepts that solution then accepts the proposition that Europeans who invaded that land, who took that land, have a legitimate right to it, and they no longer have any claim. So you cannot recognize the right of Israel to exist, because Israel does not have a right to exist. It's a false state. It's a settler state. Just like South Africa was a settler state. It's an apartheid state. It's a racist state. I mean, you have more people living in Tel Aviv from Brooklyn than you do from Africa. Netanyahu, raised in Brooklyn. I knew Netanyahu when he was in Brooklyn. Meir Kahane, who founded the party, that piece of dog doo-doo. Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And when they were in Brooklyn, they were just as racist in Brooklyn as they are in Israel. They had the same attitude towards black people who lived in Brooklyn. They treated black people the same way. They collaborated with the police. Their whole neighborhoods were protected by the police from the black community. If a black person crossed the street into their neighborhoods, they get arrested. Just like the Arabs do in Palestine today. What makes you think that white supremacy and Zionism is not synonymous? It's synonymous. Back in the days when the Black Panther Party had relationships with the PFLP and the PLP and other Palestinian organizations. This was back in 68, 67, and 69. Many of us went to Lebanon to train. Some of our cadres went to Lebanon to train, and we had a position in the Black Panther Party that racism plus nationalism equals Zionism. Okay? Zionism is a racist nationalist policy. It's just as racist as National Socialism, not as of the Nazis. It's just that National Socialism saw everybody that wasn't German as inferior, especially and hated and was anti-Jewish. When we say anti-Semitic, we have to be very careful of what we're talking about, because the Arab people are Semitic. The people, as far as I know of no blue-eyed, blonde-haired Semites. I haven't seen one. You know, so when they say, "Oh, you anti-Semitic," I'm not anti-Arab at all. And then when I say that to them, no, we're talking about Jews. I said, I don't know any Jews that are Semites. The only Jews that I know that are Semites are the original Jews from North Africa in that region. They've been there all this time. They never left. You know. There's a difference between Ashkenazi Jews and regular Orthodox Jews. Okay? So when people say to me, you know, I always flip it on them, because they don't never expect this answer. They say, "Oh, what you just said is anti-Semitic." I said, "How's that anti-Semitic? I support the Palestinian people." "No, you was just talking about the Jews and saying that but the Jews aren't Semites. The present occupiers of Palestine are not Semitic people." I said, "What are you talking about?" "Man, I know Menachem Begin, man. That dude ain't no Semite. Netanyahu from Brooklyn, he ain't no Semite. What are you talking about?" I mean, now if you was talking about the Palestinian leadership, Hamas leadership, or even the PLO, yeah. And I said I thought this and that about them. You could say I was anti-Semitic, okay? But I'm not talking about the PLO and these guys. I'm talking about, you know, these Jews here. So we have to understand that the terms that's being used, and this goes all the way back to the question you asked about the Arab Spring, the way the debate is put forward determines the course of action. Yeah. That's why Huey P. Newton once said that power is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired fashion. When you define the parameters of debate, you more or less determine what the answers are going to be. And the West has defined the parameters of the debate around Palestine. And we argue within those parameters. And that's incorrect. We're not supposed to accept the West's definition of the issue. We have to define the issue according to reality and according to our perception of reality. You see, language is important. Language is very, very important. And you know that in diplomacy, language is everything. Just a slight nuance in the word could be the difference between war and peace. And we, as Muslims, have accepted this debate that somehow Israel is a legitimate state just because it exists. Okay? Evil exists. Does that make it legitimate? Huh? Okay. In fact, evil will be on the side of illegitimacy because it's a negative. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is simply because the state of Israel exists doesn't mean we have to say, okay, so it exists, so the only solution is what we're going to do with the people there. What are you going to do with the people? What did you do with them before they got there? Where did they come from? Okay, so you have a certain population that's born there. Cool. If there's a democratic Palestinian state, they have just as much right as any other Palestinians in the same territory. Okay? If the rest of y'all want to go back to Brooklyn, hey, you know, we'll pay your fare. Bye. You understand what I'm saying? If you want to stay, this is the new state. It's not an Israeli state. It's a Palestinian state. Okay? So now if you all want to be, see, the Zionists are not going to accept that because then they're going to be essentially a powerless minority. And then they're going to depend on the sympathies and the mercy of an Arab majority. After what they've done to the Arab people in that region, I don't think they're going to be too sympathetic towards them. I don't think they're going to be too forgiving, you know. So this is one of the reasons why that's an impossible situation. The Jews are not going to do that. These Zionists are not going to do that. they realize that the legitimacy of their state, it depends on the rest of the world recognizing them as legitimate. If the Arab regimes, that's why Egypt was such a darling of the West. It recognized the legitimacy of Palestine. Jordan, Israel. Jordan recognizes the legitimacy of Israel. And I think that's the only two states that you got that do that. When they're, Mubarak's gone, so that's going to change. You see? The whole blockade of the Gaza was a conspiracy between Arab regimes, the West, and Israel. Because the blockade would have not been possible if Egypt didn't participate in it. So the minute Mubarak was overthrown, the first thing the new government did was open the Rafah crossing. No more blockade. You see? What does the Israelis say? Well, the Rafah crossing is used for terrorist purposes, to smuggle in weapons and to kill Israelis. Israelis are not safe in their homes. I mean, you have 2 Israelis that get killed in a 3-year period, and the Zionists kill, 350 Palestinians, and they're saying that they're not safe. You see? We really have to not accept the definitions of oppressors when we're trying to deal with oppression. Because left to the oppressor, he's going to define himself as not being the oppressor. So he doesn't even want to talk about his own oppression. It's not part of the debate. He'll tell you, well, we're going to talk without preconditions. What do you mean talk without preconditions? What does that mean? That means everything is on the table. You can't come to the table and say that unless I do this, unless I do that, unless you do this, unless you do that, we can't talk. He said, but you're building settlements. You're changing the reality on the ground as we speak. You haven't held the settlements up and said, let's talk. And let's talk about you spreading these settlements. So now when the end of the negotiations come, what I started out with 150 settlements, I now have 1,500 settlements to negotiate down from. And we started out with only 150. And how long have they been talking? I mean, they were talking since I was a kid. That's a long time, dog. They've been talking since I was a kid, talking. And every year it's a new peace process. Every year it's a new roadmap. A roadmap that goes nowhere. A peace process that results only in war. And who are the players in this? The sellouts of Muslims. The secular, the non-secular nationalists. The elites from the Arab world. They're the ones, the Arab League, the Muslim League. All of these leagues and international federations of elites, of intellectuals and academicians and professional diplomats who sit around talking crap while people die in the streets, while people go hungry, while entire nations are subjugated. You see? It's no little wonder that they're totally ineffective when it comes to some place like Syria. They sent a delegation to Syria to monitor it, took the delegation back. Now they're saying, well, we need to forge some type of consensus with the UN. The UN, an agency of imperialism created by the imperialists to maintain world order. A totally undemocratic institution. 7 nations in the United Nations determine the whole policy, the national security policy, the security policy of the world. And there's 100-something nations in the United Nations. They have absolutely no vote. There's no democracy. What is the United Nations but an instrument of Western imperialism? What is the occupation of the Middle East by a European settler state like Israel but a continuation of the Crusades? So when Osama bin Laden said that, what we have in the Middle East is a continuation of the West Crusade in the region, he was right. Don't make like that man was crazy. He wasn't crazy and he was right. You see? But they had to demonize him the same way they demonized the Iranian Revolution so that the majority of Muslims wouldn't stop and think about what he said. Because then they would consider, hey, how could you go for Osama bin Laden? You support terrorism? And the guys, oh, no. And you go back on your argument. You see? A war on terror. You see, they define the debate. Terrorism is a tactic. How do you declare war on a tactic? What's the war on terrorism? It's the war on a tactic. Every nation, every oppressed people have used the tactic or technique of what, quote, we call terrorism. Weak movements use terrorism. The ANC in South Africa used terrorism. The FALN in Algeria used terrorism. The American Revolution under George Washington used terrorism as a tactic for their liberation because they didn't have the strength to fight a conventional war. Okay? So when the white man comes out and says after 9/11 they're declaring war on terror, what are they talking about? I mean, what? You saying war on who? On terrorism, which means the war has no end. It's an endless war, which means the war machine in America, the military-industrial complex in America, will always have money, will always have resources, because it's a never-ending war. And capitalism needs war in order to survive.